Want to get started introducing karma?
Yep.
Perfect.
All right. Greetings, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of CARMA, the Consortium for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, which is currently in transition somewhere between the University of Nebraska and Texas Tech University, where I'll be joining the faculty in the fall. It is May 29th, 2019, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Research Methods Division CARMA Doctoral Student Junior Faculty Consortium. Just briefly, CARMA is an organizational unit that I established in 1997, and our mission is to provide support for research methods education for management and organizational studies. You may know that our two biggest programs are our webcast based program, where during the year we deliver a variety of educational events, lectures, panel sessions, workshops, things like that. And then we also have our short courses. In fact, next week we'll be running a total of 12, 6 is 18 short courses in Detroit and Boston. And so I'm a former person that's been involved a lot with the methods division over the years. And it's been a real treat for me in my role as director of CARMA to figure out and contribute to different types of partnerships and the delivery of different types of events. And this is an example of that. And so I just want to clarify our role is to provide the technology support, not only to the panelists, but to all of the participants. And so if you have any problems related to the technology or Zoom, or there's anything at all that we can help you with, just email us at karma@unl.edu. Be tracking things and help you out as best we can. So with that in mind, I'll pass you on to Thomas Greckheimer, representing the Research Methods Division. So again, welcome, and we hope you really enjoy the experience that Thomas has worked so hard to put together. Take it away, Thomas.
Well, thank you very much, Larry. Again, my name is Thomas Greckheimer, and I'm serving this year as the chair of the Research Methods Division, CARMA, Doctoral Student and Junior Faculty Consortium, which obviously would not be possible without the generous support that Larry Williams and his team at CARMA is providing every year for us, the logistical support and the technological platform and everything. So thanks very much to Larry and his team. And before introducing today's substantive first session, where we're going to talk about designing and managing your dissertation or large research project with an exciting panel of experienced scholars, I would like to introduce also John Kammeyer-Mueller, who on behalf of the Research Methods Division will welcome us and will introduce all the wonderful things that the Research Methods Division is offering for us. John, thank you for being here this morning, or this morning, afternoon, wherever you are.
Yeah. Thanks, Thomas. And thanks again both to Thomas and Larry for helping to facilitate and set this up over time. It's, I think, one of the most important developments within the Research Methods Division over the past few years, and I think it's really a great opportunity for the division to reach out to people who might not otherwise be able to attend a doctoral consortium. So this online consortium is really great, so we really appreciate the work being done here. I just wanted to start off with a brief discussion of what the Research Methods Division is, why the Research Methods Division is supporting this in general, and what you can get out of the Research Methods Division as a whole. So the Research Methods Division, as the name implies, is the group within the Academy of Management that serves as a complement to discipline-based divisions. So unlike strategy or organization theory, organization behavior, HR, and all the other areas of the academy, we are looking at the methods work to establish our research across a lot of different fields. So the Research Methods Division really is a service division that strives to incorporate perspectives from a lot of different perspectives and interest groups. I think the people who are in this consortium today represent a lot of different fields, a lot of different research approaches, and it's really been exciting to work with all the different areas over time and see how many different ways people are approaching their research. I come to study mostly from a quantitative, empirical side of work, and being able to sit in on some of the sessions within the Research Methods Division on qualitative work or on quantitative techniques that I've never seen before, simulation studies, micro-level research, macro-level, applied research. It's a really diverse group of scholars, and it's one of the best things I think about the Academy is being able to see how all these different perspectives can come together and we can learn from one another. The great majority of the symposia that you will see at the Academy of Management from the Research Methods Division are co-sponsored with other divisions, and our paper sessions and other division activities also incorporate research being done across a lot of different areas in the Academy, which again, you'll see based on the diversity of presenters through this consortium, and also hopefully you'll attend some of our events at the Academy of Management as well, meeting as well. I think that we recently did an audit, and I think based on the audit, our 5-year review, the division is in great health, and 82.6% of our members reported being either satisfied, very satisfied, or extremely satisfied with their membership. I could go on with the qualitative part, or I could do a qualitative analysis if anyone's really interested in that. We have our 5-year review within the Academy. We try to use a lot of different methods to regulate our results, but that was what we found. So what does the Research Methods Division provide? One of the things that's the most valuable tools for communication within the Research Methods Division is REMNET, R-M-N-E-T, which is a good old-fashioned listserv that is hosted. Jeff Edwards has been doing a lot of work with this over the years, but it's user-based. If you have questions, you can send it to REMNET, and then it will go out to experts in a lot of different areas. You got to. It's usually if somebody has a question there, it'll be responded to by a lot of different people, including known experts in different areas. So it's top experts in the field answering your questions on topics that range from longitudinal research design, philosophy of science, scale development, qualitative techniques, and it's just, if you're benchmarking things, if you want to find a scale, it's a great tool. So that's REMNET that's available to Research Methods Division members. We're also working on updating the division website. It's always something that we're trying to keep as current as possible. At the Research Methods Division website, you can find syllabi, example materials from different methodology courses. Just this past year, there's been a major initiative to get a consolidated list of methodology readings on different topics. So this is going to be really cool that you can come up and look at things that are both qualitative, quantitative topics, ranging from interview techniques to structural equation modeling, confirmatory factor analysis, multi-level modeling, using archival databases, and find some of the best readings in those various fields, just summarized based on experts in the field. So that's pretty exciting. And then we also have, of course, what is termed our measures chest, and that's just a list, also sort of crowdsourced, of different measures in the field that have been used in recent publications, along with citations, links to where you can find those measures, and some validity evidence for them. At the Academy of Management annual meetings, one of the most popular parts of the Research Methods Division is our performance development workshops, which look a lot like the material you're going to see today in terms of being opportunities to hear about different methodologies, ask questions, learn more about them. It's something that's rated very highly by our members. It comes immediately prior to the main academic sessions. There are some classic topics that show up every year, like moderation and mediation, use of archival databases, how to write qualitative dissertations, qualitative content analysis, things like that, that show up every year as really popular topics and that have really been helpful for a lot of members to expand their methodological acumen. We also have had cutting edge topics like machine learning, content analysis, Bayesian statistics, and then also some interactive Ask the Expert sessions. So those are all the PDWs that are offered by the Academy of Management and that are really great for people who are just starting out, working on their dissertation through to their early careers. A lot of great material there, and I think there's always something to look at there. Then we also have the AOM program itself, which hopefully people who are here are going to be able to attend things that are the live at the session in Boston follow-ups to this consortium. It's a chance to interact face-to-face with presenters from around the world. And then we have socials and receptions with good food for everybody. And then a final thing just to mention as part of the community of scholars through the Research Methods Division is that we do have links with both organizational research methods as well as, of course, Karma to help ensure high visibility for ongoing methodology development and providing tutorials and learning opportunities. So I invite you to continue to look at all the things that the Research Methods Division has to offer by looking at our website or through the Academy of Management. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the consortium. Thank you very much for your time. Thomas? Thanks.
Okay, I cannot, I had difficulty unmuting myself here. Thank you very much, John. And I can attest to what John has been talking about in terms of the value that the Research Methods Division offers to members. I consider the Research Methods Division my primary division at the Academy of Management, and it really provides a wealth of professional development and developmental opportunities for scholars to develop their various interests in research methods. So thank you very much, John. Now, I would like, before getting to today's panel, I would like to also introduce the research methods, the Research Methods Division Consortium members. So as I noted earlier, I'm serving as the chair of this year's Research Methods Division and Consortium. In doing so, I had the pleasure of working with a great group of individuals that helped to make this consortium possible and putting together the program. That included Joanna Campbell, who is serving as this year's macro track chair on this at the University of Cincinnati. Jose Cortina from Virginia Commonwealth University is serving as this year's chair of the micro track, and Sanjay Jain from the North Carolina State University at Northridge is serving as this year's qualitative methods track chair. And many thanks to these track chairs for putting together a panel for each of the 5 online sessions of exceptional scholars that represent qualitative and quantitative as well as micro-oriented and macro-oriented research methods, and therefore provide for an excellent program. And also, I would like to note here the hard work that the Research Methods Division students representatives put into helping to organize this year's consortium. And many thanks to Nitya Chawla, Elizabeth Clayton, Yifan Song, and Ki Sang for the hard work with helping with this. Now, very briefly, in terms of this year's participants, we have more than 130 participants registered for this year's consortium, representing 21 countries. And I invite everyone to use their Zoom group chat function to shout out a welcome to everybody else who is participating and to the panelists of today. And very briefly, we have a wonderful agenda for this year's consortium of the 5 online sessions. We'll kick off with what I believe will be an interesting session today on designing and managing your dissertation or large research project. We will follow this up next week with a session on new approaches to collecting and sourcing data. And in the third week, we will deal with the special issue of issues with longitudinal and process studies research designs, followed by a session on advances in data analysis approaches. And then our last session will be a Meet the Editor panel, where we will have the opportunity to discuss issues of on research methods issues with current and former editors of and associate editors of some of the top journals in our field. Now, having said this, I would like to move us to today's first session. Again, the topic of today is designing and managing your dissertation or large research project. And I would like to welcome our panelists for today. We have Andrew Van der Ven from the University of Minnesota, who will start us off in this consortium today. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to welcome Andrew, and I'm sure there will be many things we can learn from his presentation and then discussing with him. Andrew will be followed by Ryan Krause from Texas Christian University, and he will represent the more macro-oriented track on the issue, and he will speak primarily on his thoughts on what comes first, data or research questions or data. And then finally, we will have Dan Putka, who will take a little bit more specific focus on analytic options management researchers have for addressing research questions that involve prediction and evaluation of a theoretical model. Together, these panelists will provide a food for thought for a range of topics on research design considerations. Having said this, I would like to hand over right away to Andrew to get us started, please. And I very much look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Do you hear me well? Wonderful. Thank you so much for all of the efforts that was just summarized by Thomas and Larry and John. It's incredible to have this opportunity to participate in this activity when you can see an infrastructure has emerged that is quite phenomenal. I'm looking forward to a discussion that would focus on the issues of designing and managing your dissertation. Now I'm in the process of bringing this up, and I want to share some overhead slides. And Andrew, can you help me? I'm
sure, just go ahead and just put it in presentation mode like we had before.
Click here to launch. No, I'm launching into the meeting. What am I doing wrong here? Okay, I wish to share.
Oh, we can see them. On your regular screen, you just need to do hit the presentation button on your PowerPoint real quick.
Ah, thank you.
No problem.
The power, hit the presentation. Where is that button that I push? Share.
Down by the Zoom bar at the bottom.
Zoom. Is it there now?
You can just hit F5 also.
F5. Okay, I just did. I don't want to leave the meeting.
Oh, nope, you just want to make sure you've clicked on the PowerPoint.
Okay, here I'm going to take the PowerPoint again. Here it is.
Yep.
And I want to share this.
Yep, down. Oh, you're already sharing it. Just go down and hit just down below where your cursor is now. You see the Zoom bar right next to that. There's a little button that'll hit present. Right. Hit that right there.
Right there. And now I'm good.
There you go. All good.
All right. All right. Well, thank you.
No problem.
I'm so pleased to have this opportunity to co-present this session with Ryan Krause and Dan Putka. We're each, as Thomas said, going to be dealing with different subjects. And the one I'm going to focus on is primarily the question, where do you get your research project question from? Does it come to you, or do you go looking for a research question? I think many of us think that we got to think long and hard about finding a research project. However, I must say, I have never gone out to look for my dissertation or a research project. Instead, they've always come to me. For example, as a PhD student to Professor Andre Delbecq at the University of Wisconsin, he was conducting some neighborhood block meetings to identify the needs of low-income people. And in one of these meetings, after introductions, about 15 people were there, and the question was asked, what are the difficulties you have in raising your children in this low-income neighborhood? And nobody talked. It was as quiet, perhaps, as is this presentation right now. And that led me and led Andre to send me to the library to say, go find out, why don't people talk in group meetings? And from that process, we began to recognize that one piece of research, because it's well understood why people don't speak in meetings in terms of gender and ethnicity and income and social factors that inhibit people to communicate. But there was a study that found by Taylor and Osborne, I believe, that when individuals work alone, they generate more ideas than when they sit in a group. And there came the aha experience from Professor Delbecq, who said, let's start the meeting by not letting people talk. And that was precisely the section that got it going, which then led to eventually the development of our nominal group technique, which is today one of the world's most frequently used brainstorming meetings. A second example, just after I got my PhD, a friend asked me, would I be interested in studying organization at the Wisconsin Department of Labor? I said, yes, I'd love to. So this provided me an opportunity to get engaged in organization assessment, to design measurement instruments, and to develop essentially a framework, a theory of a work group and organization design. A third happened when I was a senior professor and I moved from the Wharton School to the University of Minnesota. And the new dean at the University of Minnesota invited me to say, would you like to meet other CEOs in the Twin Cities area? I said, I'd love to. So sure enough, I then had meetings with about 30 chief executive officers of the various corporations in the Twin Cities. And I asked them a common question, which was, what keeps you awake at night? And one of the most common responses was innovation. We are doing fine today, but I'm seriously concerned about what may happen tomorrow. And that, in turn, then led me to send a letter to all of these CEOs asking, would you like us to study innovation? And if we do, would you be willing to participate in the study? And about half of them said yes. And that was the start then of me starting a snowballing process to generate colleagues and other faculty and doctoral students, so that we developed this Minnesota Innovation Research Program that consisted of 30 investigators and about 15 doctoral students from 8 or 9 different departments here at the University of Minnesota. And we tracked innovations over a period of about 10 years from concept to implementation. Well, as you can see, these research projects came to me through engagement. I was out there talking with people and getting engaged, not by my own doing, but thank goodness, because others provided me access to seeing what was going on. Unfortunately, I think there is too little engagement going on in our social research today. And now I'm going to cancel this and want to hide this. So as you can see from my slide, the current state of social science research, I think, is having a couple of big problems. They include especially the gap between theory and practice. And it's a dual gap, quite frankly. Academics are being told, put your theories into practice, whereas managers are being told, put your practice into theory. Or if you can't do that, how on earth is your organization going to learn and continue to develop competence and knowledge in this knowledge-intensive society? Another aspect of it is to recognize that an awful lot of our research is not being used, neither for theory nor practice. There's plenty of evidence that evidence-based practices are not being implemented. And there's also plenty of evidence, in fact, the study by Bill Starbuck showing that on average, papers that are published in management journals do not even get one citation per year. Now, this is a pretty sorry state, isn't it? When you think of all of the effort that we do putting into this research, writing papers, and none of them are making a difference, neither in theory nor in practice. It's almost like saying much of our research is going down a rat hole. Well, maybe we got to change this. And that's the purpose of this notion, this discussion of engaged scholarship. It's to suggest that, many of us run into complex problems that far exceed our limited individual capabilities. And that being the case, we can study these issues much better if we step outside of ourselves and engage relevant stakeholders in the research process than when we try to do this alone. That has been the main objective of this book on engaged scholarship that I wrote in 2007. But it has become also a website. And if you can see the website, it indicates the place to go, which provides essentially a flipped course for PhD students on each of these steps in doing engaged scholarship research. The central objective, the central purpose, or the central claim in this book is this: we can increase the likelihood of advancing knowledge for science and practice by engaging with practitioners and other stakeholders and disciplines in 4 different steps of every study. First, grounding the problem and research question up close and from afar. Second, developing alternative theories that address the question. Third, collecting evidence to compare models that we are studying. And then fourth, communicating the research findings. I use this diamond model to communicate and to use the study. I have this problem here, and my computer says it may restart in a couple of minutes. I don't know. The purpose is that first, problem formulation. Begin by situating and grounding the research problem up close and from afar. And by that I mean up close. For example, if you look at journalist questions, the first paragraph is up close. The second paragraph of these feature stories is from afar. Up close, you might say something like, Joe Blow lost his job at XYZ company 6 months ago. And Joe Blow's been looking for work. Unfortunately, he can't find any. And he just returned from his psychologist who was concerned about his mental health. Moreover, he's on the verge of a family divorce. You see, nothing much is going good for Joe Blow. Then the second paragraph, Joe Blow's not alone. There's so many hundred thousands of people who've been put out of work, and they are in turn being found not to be able to identify themselves. They're losing their identity. They're having physical and mental problems. Nothing much good happens to people who are put out of work. That question, what do we do about the Joe Blows of this world? Now you can understand what I'm speaking of. A concrete, practical, up-close story, and then from afar to understand the pervasiveness of the situation. And that takes us then to theory building. That is to say, exploring alternative hunches, theories, models that may be used to address the question. One of them might be, for example, a human resource development program that provides job training and development efforts. And there are several of them that could be systematically compared. Another one, of course, is to look at it from a public policy point of view, to say, what is the society doing about the people who are being put out of work? And that may be leading to some public policy situation. The point is, in theory building, you're presenting your answer to this question, but you don't ever rely on just one answer. Compare alternative answers or alternative models or theories or propositions. The whole point is knowledge advances with the comparative method. So at a minimum, we should at least propose a model and compare it with the status quo, which is how that problem or issue has been addressed today. If we don't do that, we can't really specify what it is, what is the contribution of our work in comparison to what we already know. Having said that, that takes us then to research design, where we develop a particular variant or process model to examine the alternative models that we're studying. Now, many of us think of this research design as focusing on data collection in organizations or in particular sites. But if you take the engaged scholarship point of view, you take a much broader point of view. Instead of viewing organizations as just a data collection site or source of the information, we should be thinking of them as a site for a learning laboratory, a learning factory, where researchers can learn with practitioners by engaging with them in understanding the alternative models, and which then finally takes us, after conducting the study, to problem solving, communicating, interpreting, and negotiating the findings of our study. And it is here where we have to recognize that one of the reasons why an awful lot of our research doesn't go any places because it isn't understood. We have to cross and think systematically about three critical boundaries when we're trying to communicate knowledge. One is a syntax problem, which is you got to know the language. But in an awful lot of areas, we don't know the language because we don't and haven't yet developed the interactive expertise that Collins talks about as necessary in order to understand and communicate in a specific subject area. Second, we need semantics. We need to understand the meanings of the words that are used. But when we have specialized knowledge, we will almost always be using terms that people don't understand. So we've got to translate those. And third is the problem of pragmatics. You may understand exactly what I mean, but you may also say, no, thanks, Andy. I got more important things to worry about, which then in turn, of course, takes you someplace else, which is to say, we've got to negotiate the meaning and potential use in order to have impact in our work. Now, this engaged scholarship can be done in a variety of forms. And the box one, basic science with stakeholder advice, is the one that I advise for doctoral students and junior faculty, because it is here where you maintain control. You are describing and explaining some basic research question as opposed to designing and intervening in it. And you often have to take a detached outsider's perspective. We could talk about that further, but the whole point then comes to the research proposal, the kind of research proposal that you would submit to a faculty committee as the basis of your research dissertation proposal. It may also be the kind of questions you would address in a 20-page proposal submitted to the National Science Foundation or some research funding agency that proposes the kind of work you want to do. The 5 questions that I use and that I work with doctoral students all the time on in terms of developing their proposal is, first, what is the research problem in question that you are studying? Again, discussing addressing the who, what, where, when, and why a problem exists up close and from afar. It's to describe, to explain, or predict or evaluate. Understanding the kind of question we have will lead to the kind of research design that we want to undertake. What is your proposed answer? The answer is don't ever rely on just one. Always compare your answer with the status quo. Third, how will you empirically study the proposed answer? Yeah, research design for gathering data to examine your proposal is the critical issue. And fourth, how will you communicate the findings? That is, how do you interpret and use the findings to cross the various communication barriers? Underlying these four questions are these basic questions about whose perspective will you take? From a critical realist perspective, we must recognize that we are human researchers. We're not God. We don't take a God's eye view. I can't possibly be impartial, all-knowing, all universal, and all balanced in my perspective. I am a slave of my own training, my own experience, and hence I always need to step outside of myself if I'm going to understand something better. But with whom is the question? And the answers to that, of course, deal with for whom and with whom are you conducting the research? Whose point of view will you take to conduct the study? And who will you engage to answer these questions? That point is, therefore, to say, don't go it alone. Having said that, I have some suggestions for thinking in terms of a longer scale perspective about doing the larger research. So going beyond the doctoral dissertation is that larger research project. And my hope is that your dissertation focuses on a big question that withstands the test of time. And because the question is the lightning rod, it is that question that triggers the interest of academics and practitioners alike. So spend a lot of time looking for or being brought to the question, much like I had at the beginning. Second, design each project as a learning community. By that I mean, think in terms of not just organizations as funding sites or data collection sites, but begin to think in terms of how do I engage in learning with other researchers, particularly over time. When I am engaged in longitudinal field research, I'm always asked a question. Well, Andy, you're the professor. What is your answer to our question? To which I always come back to them to say, look, if I knew the answer to your question, I wouldn't be doing this study. So I'd be interested in your answer, and I would like to share my answer, and we can engage into a meaningful discussion. So by that I mean, therefore, transform your consulting questions into learning. And fourth, conduct your study over an extended duration of time. This is really crucial. Have you noticed that most of the studies that are presenting information of questionnaires or interviews are cross-sectional in nature? And most people will not be
appears we lost Andy here. Andrew,
I believe it looks like his computer restarted, like he was prompting us about.
Like he was afraid of. Well, okay, what I would suggest then, we'll give Andrew's computer the time needed to recover, and we'll move on in the interim to Ryan. And then if Andrew has any concluding thoughts that he would like to share for regarding his presentation, we can return to that later. So Ryan, if you would take over for now. Ryan, you're not unmuted. Andrew, could we unmute Ryan?
Okay, I think we got it. Thank you. Well, yeah, sorry to have to, break in the middle of Andrew's talk.
I'm back.
Oh, he's back. Never mind. Well, I hope you all enjoyed my talk.
Well, I'm back on a different computer. but I can at least conclude my comments. I'm so sorry that this happened, but I was going through some of the suggestions for sustained creativity and commitment in a long-term project rather than a short-term dissertation project. And my points were: number one, design the research project with the learning community in mind, transform questions from consulting into learning, design the study for an extended duration so that people come to know you and that you can penetrate more deeply into subject matter than you ever could in the first time through. Employ multiple theories and methods, because in that way we can increase the opportunity for triangulation, whereas triangulation can be used as a method to maximize learning, because different models provide different ways to represent complex problems, and these represent alternative ways to facilitate good theory building. And finally, interactive expertise. You can't study a domain in which you have no interactional expertise, according to Collins and Evans in their book, Rethinking. So we need to come to know the context and the culture of the study before going too deeply into it, because without doing that, we probably won't know what's going on. So establishing a relationship with indigenous leaders and co-investigators is crucial for long-term, large research programs. Thank you. I'm going to stop at that point, and I'll turn it over to Ryan. Thank you, Ryan.
Okay, can you all hear me? Make sure
I hear you.
all right, cool. So yeah, thanks. So I'm Ryan Krause. I'm at Texas Christian University, and I also want to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me and putting this whole thing together. So I am not nearly as organized as Professor Van de Ven is. I don't have slides. So my goal here is just to provide some thoughts on what has been for me probably one of, if not the most frequently asked questions I get talking to PhD students, talking to junior faculty, which all kind of have something to do with, you know, a similar idea to you know what we just heard, which is, you know, where do you get research ideas, right? But I want to take a bit of a methodological spin on that question. I think that the comments we just heard are actually a really good first thing to listen to. I didn't plan it that way, but I think that a lot of the suggestions that we got from Andy actually kind of dovetail nicely into what I'm going to say. And so one of the big methodological issues that I hear about, or questions I hear about from PhD students who are trying to come up with a dissertation idea, or working on their dissertation, or you know, junior faculty who are continuing to, you know, try to get their dissertation published, or just working on a large research project in general, is, you know, what should drive the decisions with regard to putting together essentially a large research project. Should we be focused on the question, and should that drive our data collection, or should we be focused on the question, focused on the data, and that drive the questions that we ask? And so I'm going to try to provide I'm going to try to thread the needle here on something that you know, strikes a balance between idealism and pragmatism in my suggestions for how to address that issue. And I don't think there's an entirely satisfactory way of addressing it, but these are my thoughts. And so, you know, what I would say when whatever stage you're at with a large research project, whether it's trying to come up with an idea for a dissertation, all the way to, you know, trying to figure out how to get publications out of a finished dissertation. For better or worse, there is a premium in our line of work on interestingness and novelty. I think despite its problems, I think that's overall a good thing. I think it keeps knowledge moving forward. But as a result, the conclusion there is sort of something about your research has to be novel and it has to be innovative in some way. And I want to argue that when you're putting together a large research project like a dissertation, if it's quantitative where you're anticipating, having a large data set with lots of different facets to it, I would argue that you want both the data and the question to be at least somewhat innovative and novel. I don't think that always needs to be the case with every research project, particularly with, if you're doing a one-off paper, one-off research project. I had a mentor who used to draw like a 2x2 of old data, old theory, new theory. And he said, if you want to get published, you can either have old data and new theory, or new data and old theory, but you can't get away with, old data, old theory is boring, and new data, new theory is way too innovative, and no one's going to accept it. And I think that has a lot of truth to it. But I want to challenge you in your dissertations or similar large research projects to think about that. It should be a high priority to have interesting questions and interesting data. For a few reasons. And when I say, I think interesting questions is probably straightforward, but when I say interesting data, I mean, not the usual suspects. So I do a lot, my research is in corporate governance, and I don't know how many papers I review that basically use the same databases, the same, they pull the accounting data off of CompuStat, they pull the compensation data off of executive comp, they pull the demographic data off of Vortex or Corporate Library, run a bunch of correlations and find something. And I realize that's, kind of an extreme example because of the availability of those databases. But generally speaking, that would be what I would call old data. These are variables that people have used before, all of them, and they're just not very interesting data. And so when I talk about interesting data or novel data, I'm talking about it's something that people, whether it's variables that people haven't used before to measure, so like new measures of existing constructs that really improve the construct validity or something like that, or capture a different part of the construct, to totally new constructs that are new to the literature. That's what I'm talking about, or new data sources, right? Where you have to kind of change the measurement. So that's what I mean when I say new data or interesting data. So the reason I think it's important is, with a large research project, you want two things. One's practical, and one's more pragmatic career-wise, and one is more idealistic. And the pragmatic one is you want to publish multiple papers, ideally, out of this large project, right? You don't want to put all this time and effort into a dissertation and get one paper out of it. I mean, one's way better than none, but you want to be able to leverage it, not just for quantity's sake, but also for issues of thought leadership. I think that's becoming more and more important in tenure decisions. It certainly is at TCU, and being able to say, I led this big project, and I have driven multiple publications on this topic, or using these data on this theory, et cetera. So those are the pragmatic reasons. And then I think, idealistically speaking, there is a big push, and we just heard about it in Andy's talk, on toward impact. AACSB is really wanting to incorporate impact more into evaluations of research and teaching and that sort of thing. And so being able to say something new and say it loudly with a large data set with multiple publications really improves the ability to make an impact. Unfortunately, I think that we have the quote unquote gap mentality in research, the theoretical gap, and I worry, there's a value to that, but I worry that promotes right here, the use of existing variables and methods a bit too much, because what we do is we look to the literature and we say, well, here's all the stuff that's been studied. They've looked at this relationship and this relationship, but this variable from this one over here hasn't been linked to that variable from that one over there. So that's a gap. We haven't put those two together. And I think it leads to kind of a narrower view of contributions. So my big point here is, when you're doing something like a dissertation, think about having some kind of interesting data as well as interesting questions. I don't think hopefully none of your advisors are telling you that your research questions shouldn't be interesting in a dissertation, but I think that there could be more of a push to really try and make data, the data collection more novel, more interesting going forward. That can mean a number of different things. So I'm a strategy person, and so I kind of tend to think in those terms. But you might for one thing, in strategy, we have quite a few constructs, and our measurement, to be perfectly honest, is terrible. We do way less construct validation than we should. We use R&D spending to measure like 15 different constructs. And so, one opportunity, I think, is to introduce some construct clarity by whether it's developing better measures or, seeking out databases that have information that could be used for better measures and that sort of thing that aren't, people aren't currently aware of, or creating those yourself from publicly available information. And that's one of the really big opportunities for interesting data, is how much information is publicly available about organizations, about CEOs, boards, whatever, there's just so much qualitative data that's available and can be quantified. There's a huge opportunity there. On the OB side, thinking creatively about research design and about research settings. And, it's kind of, I realize it's sort of precious for a strategy person to say, you should go find, innovative research settings and come up with innovative research designs. Because I realize it's very, very difficult to get access to organizations to do field studies and things like that. And then on top of that, to think of an innovative way to make that work. But, that's the great thing about a dissertation. And there are so few great things about a dissertation. But one of them is you really get to, you get to put a stake in the ground and say, this is who I am as a scholar. This is the impact I'm going to have over the next half a decade once I leave the PhD program and start to publish from this data set. And so you really want to make it something where people think, oh yeah, that's Professor so-and-so, that's their area, and they introduce this concept, or they introduce this measure, or they use that really cool data setting. That stuff, again, for better or worse, that stuff really can make a difference in the trajectory of your career. So I really encourage thinking about, what data can you get that would be really interesting on its own, and then pair it with some interesting theory, make it super interesting, right? So with, I'll wrap it up here in a second, but so I want to offer some steps that I think are really crucial to achieving this kind of data question novelty alignment, because again, you want them both to be novel. And the first step I would say is before you start a really big research project, because they're often very costly, if often in terms of money, but certainly in terms of time and opportunity cost. So before you start that, really educate yourself in the literature. And that means the theories, that are used, the data sources that are available, the methods that are used, the topics that are incorporated, however you define the literature. What you don't want is to be in the middle of a data collection process and realize you've ignored a whole part of the literature, or you're just, you run into, if you're engaging engaging is the wrong verb here, but if you're conducting the kind of engaged scholarship that we just heard about, you don't want to be in the midst of collecting data in a field setting and realize you aren't bringing a full knowledge of the literature to that problem, right? The practitioners can tell you things from their perspective. Your contribution is to bring the theoretical. So that's the ground level, is really having a deep understanding of the literature. And then once investigate practice. And that can be the kind of engaged scholarship we just heard about. But it can also just be, when people ask me, what should I do to come up with research questions? I say, read the Wall Street Journal, read Forbes, read the Wall Street Journal. They cover, it's not news to cover stuff that happens every day. It's news to cover unusual things or interesting things. And so honestly, you can find all sorts of opportunities for theoretical contribution and ideas for data, ways to operationalize those things if you bring a deep understanding of theory and of the literature to reading the Wall Street Journal, to reading Forbes. If you're on the OB side, job shadowing would be an absolute great opportunity. Not that difficult to find, organizations that'll let you, follow somebody around. And so it's amazing the ideas that can come from that. And not just ideas for research questions, but, you're seeing the potential operationalizations in front of you when you're engaging with practice in that way. The third recommendation is, once you've collected your data, understand your data. This is a pet peeve of mine where, I see this with, I run into this with co-authors even, but certainly with reviewers, where you get the data set, you run the regression, and you don't even look at the underlying data to understand, what's going on. Why are these relationships happening? I would say, dig into individual observations, look at outliers, figure out, if you've got companies or your unit of analysis, look at the individual companies, why are they showing these outliers, or, what's going on to drive the observations and the values you get in your data set. And ideally collect something qualitative and read it. So for my dissertation, just to give you an example, sort of a lot of this is based on my experience. And, I collected the Securities and Exchange Commission just fortuitously when I started my dissertation, started requiring the companies disclose why they separate their CEO and board chair positions. So I collected all of those from proxy statements and coded them by hand, which required me to read them. And the amount of variance I found astounded me. And actually, I got ideas for totally unrelated research projects, or at least not using my dissertation data set, just from reading those and seeing kind of weird nuances that companies had. And so really, all that to say, really understand the data you're working with, qualitatively and quantitatively. And then the fourth one is like I described, use that data to spur future research questions that don't necessarily use the data set you've collected, right? But in that, by understanding your data, you can build on it, and then build your theoretical understanding and additional research questions using different data, right? And collecting other data sets to supplement what you've got. So all that to say, very simple solution, just make both your data and your research questions very interesting, and you'll have no problem. So that's all I have.
Great, Ryan. Thank you very much. And we'll turn over now to Dan as our third panelist. And just before letting Dan start, I would like to remind participants here that the presenters will make their slides available. So I will work with them after the session concludes to get these slides to you. Having said that, Dan, you're all ready to go. Thank you.
All right. Could you see my slides?
Not yet.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so you see the full screen version?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right, well, yeah, I would like to extend my thanks to the Academy and Karma as well for hosting this today. I think it's great to have an outlet like this that students and faculty could benefit from, and it certainly cuts down on travel costs as well. So my talk is going to be a little bit different from the previous two, in that it's going to be far more narrow and focused on some developments, particularly with respect to methods of prediction. So the past 25 years, as you may know, there's been an explosion of research with respect to prediction models and methods. And this isn't only occurring kind of with respect to models themselves. So for example, you may be familiar with extensions of linear regression, such as lasso models or elastic nets, or on the nonlinear side, things like random forests or support vector machines. But there's really been a revolution in terms of some concepts as well that have fundamental implications anytime we pose research questions that involve prediction of some outcome we may value, whether that's at a micro level or a macro level. So some of these concepts include bagging or bootstrap aggregation of models from a sample, things like boosting or model diversity or model ensembles. There's a lot of new concepts floating around that could also be of value to research and management, and in my field, IO psychology. And despite having been around for a couple decades now, this has been very slow to trickle in to the management and IO literature. Where you're beginning to see some of it trickle in is in discussions of big data, machine learning, and AI. But it's a little bit misleading, as I'll talk to in this presentation, is regardless of whether you're dealing with a very large project or a very large data set or something more traditionally sized, these developments have implications likely for what you're working on. So when you contrast this situation with kind of our default go-to prediction methods that we're often taught in grad school, what we formally learn about represents a very narrow slice of what's possible when we're faced with classification problems or regression problems. So classification basically arises when we're trying to predict or explain a binary outcome or a multiple category outcome. So you'll see things like logistic regression, both binary and multinomial versions, techniques like discriminant analysis, and of course there's variations on these simple types of models, full models where we enter in, say, all predictors that are relevant to us, maybe adopt some stepwise technique to cut down or identify those that we think are most salient. In general, I would highly caution against stepwise methods. As in the methods literature, they've been railed against pretty heavily. You've got extensions of those that involve multi-level methods and cross-classified models as well. And same thing if we're predicting more of a continuous outcome. And those are typically referred to as regression problems in the machine learning literature. So here we have the good old, ordinary least squares regression, and of course you have variance on that. And so when we talk historically about prediction methods in our field, we tend to think of these methods. So when we say we're going to do a regression, we typically think of OLS regression, right? So in reality, the number of methods available today for addressing classification and regression problems are staggering, and they're growing on seemingly a weekly basis. So for example, if you look at the carrot package in R, which is basically a package for running various types of prediction models, there's over 180 classification models and 130 regression models available. So far more than just your OLS and logistic regression. And when you couple those opportunities with the ability to blend predictions from multiple models into what are called ensembles, the possibilities become limitless. So in practice, if you look at a lot of hard prediction problems, Things like forecasting the trajectory of hurricanes is one example. As it turns out, predicting people's movie preferences is another practical example. Or if you look at things like online machine learning contests, the winning models in those cases are not typically based on a single theory-based model or a single empirically based model. They're typically based on ensembles of multiple models that really take different perspectives on the prediction or explanation problem. And those typically will outperform any single model because reality tends to be more complex than what a single model may support. So why is this important to management scholars? Why should we pay attention to these developments? Well, for one, it could result in improved prediction of outcomes we care about relative to our traditional methods. Second, we have the potential to improve understanding of how predictors may relate to outcomes we value. From a practical perspective, if we have improved prediction and understanding, as a practitioner, that could lead to more informed action planning, right? So as we work with organizations to implement our theories or implement our models of some outcomes, we're on stronger ground with regard to informing what they actually do about it, how they actually act on that new knowledge. But one thing that I think people often don't think of in these conversations of applications of machine learning is it really gives us a more robust way to potentially evaluate theoretically specified models. So let me give you a couple examples. So let's say we're trying to predict some outcome that we care about, again, whether it's micro or macro level. And we have a few rather simple theory-based models that tend to underperform some of these more empirical modern methods upon cross-validation. So historically, when we judge things like correlations between predictions and, say, an actual outcome, we're using a benchmark of maybe 0, right? So is the correlation statistically significant, if you will? And less so do we benchmark our theoretical models against what's possible based on the data before us. So what we could use that comparison for, sort of a more flexible empirical-based model versus a theory-based model, is where are the theory-based models falling short? If we find this over and over again, that we have this empirical model cross-validate and outperformed a theory-based model, it suggests that our theory is falling short in some way. So really, this has a potential to help address where gaps in our knowledge and theories lie, which is often not associated with machine learning empirically driven models. Second way to frame this is what happens if we find modern methods with, say, item level predictors outperform a model with scale-based predictors. So typically, psychometric theory would imply we form multi-item measures to form reliable scales, right? And we typically use those scales as the basis of, say, predictors or moderators or mediators in our models. And so from a psychometric perspective, we typically view item specificity as a form of error variance rather than something that may have value for the outcomes we care about. Beyond what a construct might imply. So such a finding would suggest that that specificity may have value, and it would beg the question of what characteristics of items might be driving predictions beyond the construct-based explanations that are tied back to the scales we typically form. So both of these questions provide examples of where pitting sort of more empirically based, flexible modeling methods versus more theory-based, say, structural methods may help advance knowledge in a variety of different areas. So to give you a little bit more concrete sense of why these methods may be of value, when you think about a prediction problem, it comes down to a balancing act, right? So on one end, you could overfit the model or overutilize the sample of data. Basically, you implement a model that's too complex for the data you have. Sometimes you'll hear the word capitalizing on chance. You develop a model on one sample, you apply it to another, and lo and behold, the validity drops close to 0. In that case, you may be overfitting the model. it's too specific to the sample it was trained on. However, there's also the other side of this coin, and that's underfitting. And in that case, you may be using a model that's too simple. And so in the previous slide, we saw examples of where this was the case. So you may have a relatively simple theoretical model that tends to underperform upon cross-validation relative to a more flexible empirical model. But you never know it if you don't look at it. And so we tend to potentially underfit models. We tend to potentially overfit models. But in both cases, it could lead to lower prediction. So where a lot of these modern methods can help, and a commonality they share, is they offer the ability to empirically tune the complexity of the model given the data you have. So, one, I think, knee-jerk reaction to applications of machine learning in scientific fields like management or IO is that, oh, you're just capitalizing on chance. But the irony here is these methods actually are done with generalization to future samples and new data sets and new situations as a primary concern. And they have features built into their model or the process of fitting these models that allow you to help you strike that balance. And this is where part of the irony lies, in that these are largely discussed in the context of big data, but typically in our research, we don't deal with big data. We have more limited data, and in those situations, it becomes even more pertinent and important to strike a balance between this issue of model complexity and parsimony. All right, so this issue of model fitting has existed for 100 years, right? Ever since we've been collecting data in our fields, this has been an issue. So we haven't ignored it, but arguably, we've handled this in a suboptimal way. So the traditional way we handle this balance is by aggregating, say, items to form composites or scales. We exclude predictors or limit interactions or nonlinearities in our model based on prevailing theories or assumptions. We adopt ad hoc rules of thumb about, okay, if you have this sample size, you could only include this number of predictors in your model. And we look at cross-validity of our models as something we estimate after the fact. Contrast this with a modern perspective. These methods offer us much greater flexibility to evaluate theoretically informed constraints up front based on the data available, optimally scale the complexity of our models through the tuning process rather than kind of arbitrary rules, and proactively factor cross-validation into model building and estimation rather than looking at it after the fact or something beyond our control. But the benefits here go beyond right-sizing our models. So as I alluded to earlier, they could provide us with some new insights that we wouldn't see if we stuck to strictly theoretically specified models all the time. So traditional methods, we often deal with a situation where, we may collect the data we need and limit predictors to those that are specified in our theory, if you will. We may limit the number of nonlinear relations or interactions. We may limit our number of predictors based on sample size, as I said, and typically OLS regression and logistic regression have some requirements around multicollinearity, right? So if predictors are correlated, we tend to run into problems. The broader reality is when you start working with real organizational data sets, archival data sets, you have the presence of a lot of predictors. Some of them that may be relevant based on your theory, some of them that may be relevant but are missed by your theory, and simply a lot of noise, some that are irrelevant regardless of what perspective you're adopting. You may have an unknown and potentially large number of nonlinear relations and interactions that prevailing theory just isn't deep enough to address. So for example, if you start working with large multinational data sets, a lot of our theories, I would argue, are more, I would say, nationally based. I don't know how much knowledge exists that they generalize across countries. And so, for example, when you start studying engagement or turnover and have access to a data set where you've got survey data from employees in 30 different countries, where the divisions in those countries are running things a little bit differently, suddenly, lo and behold, you have a lot of interesting and different moderators that start to emerge and that cross-validate over time that, again, you wouldn't see sticking with fairly simple theory-based models. So to wrap things up on my end, I wanted to kind of keep this fairly short so we save plenty of time for discussion. You have a lot of options, and a lot of your options are not going to be visible if you simply stick to traditional publications reviewed by management scholars or IO psychologists. You're going to have to look beyond, because as I said, a lot of this information has yet to trickle into our literature. So I've offered some foundational texts here. These are all textbooks largely written by statisticians or computer scientists. I've got the full references at the end of this deck. I would be happy to comment on any of these. These range from providing a very nice historical perspectives on developments in modeling from, basic OLS regression through the modern day, to very practical hands-on perspective. Here's a data set, here's R code, here's how you fit these models, here's important considerations, to very much more theoretically driven treatments of these models, which in all honesty are very tough sledding for folks with our graduate training. There's also plenty of online resources. So if you've ever heard of Kaggle, they host online machine learning competitions where organizations will put out data sets, offer up money, and teams will compete to maximize some criterion of interest to an organization. Stack Exchange Cross-Validated is a great place to get help from various people working with these methods. And when all else fails, just ask the Google, because the Google knows everything. But in all seriousness, if you consult online resources or these textbooks, always triangulate resources. Try to look for convergence among a diverse set of resources, because of course we can't believe everything online, not only for silly things, but also for research methods as well. Even if you're not an R user or a Python user, the sites I cite here are also very good for getting your head around some options available. I do not use Python. I'm a strict R user, but I found the scikit-learn documentation extremely helpful for, again, kind of rounding out my knowledge with regard to some of the methods that are now possible. A few more helpful articles that I think strike closer to home for people with management graduate training or IO training are the articles here. Domingos is not a management scholar, not an IO. It's written in the communications for the, I think it's believed, the advancement of computing machinery. Kind of an esoteric journal, very popular in the computer science area though, and it's highly readable. And so this is a really good overview if you're interested in leveraging these methods for your research. I recently had an article published in ORM in 2018 that aimed to provide a non-mathematical overview of several modern prediction methods and how they compare to traditional concepts like OLS regression. Used a real data set as an example and worked through each models. Also shared annotated R code to show you how the fitting and cross-validation process works. Fred Oswald and I did a chapter in PsyOps Big Data book that's a little bit more big picture in nature that talks about implications in ML for progress in IO and management science. And then Yarkoni and Westphal is another highly recommended read. Oftentimes in science, we're concerned with issues of explanation, but I think Yarkoni and Westphal do a really good job of showing how prediction could help us advance knowledge in a variety of disciplines and the hazards of taking strictly a traditional explanation focus. It's just a really thoughtful, really easy to read article that I would highly recommend. So that's all I have. And I hope you heard that.
Yes.
Excellent.
Andrew, I'm not able to start my video right now. if you could help me with that.
Okay. And I just stopped sharing, so.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Dan. And without much ado, I would like to move over now into a question and answers period. I think we have Ryan is not currently with us. He had to take shelter apparently because of a tornado warning, but hopefully he will still be able to join us back in. But we have Andrew and Dan with us. Or Andy. Andy, are you here? Could you come back on? And I would invite, great, thank you. And I would invite all participants now to send in their questions for the panelists through the chat function. And we can use that to tackle some of the concerns or questions or follow-ups that the panelists are having. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, perhaps one follow-up that I would like to ask to Andy Van de Ven regarding his recommendations. And you recommended to conduct studies that are extending over periods of time. Could you elaborate a little bit here in terms of suggestions and recommendations that you may have for doctoral students and junior faculty members who may be concerned about the time pressures to quote unquote produce, and may feel that it may be difficult to have studies that extend over periods of time?
Yes, I'm happy to comment on that. We all know when we have first-time for interviews that they tend to be shallow, formal kinds of presentations. The questions we ask would like to penetrate more deeply than the answers. The fact of the matter is, this is social research with human beings who are not going to share their secrets nor their dirty laundry with great.
Andy, I'm sorry, just to comment here, I think we have some difficulty with the audio here. I have difficulty hearing you.
Let me switch to my other computer and I'll be talking sideways. You hear me now?
Let Andy Van de Ven return to his other computer. And in the meantime, once more, everybody, you can use the chat function to send in your question that we can post to the panelists.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Very good. And I am going to.
Okay, so now I have.
And now you hear me?
Yes.
The question was why or what's this idea about engaging in an extended duration of time in doing research? There's several reasons. Number one is that when you meet a stranger, like a researcher who comes in and conducts an interview or a questionnaire or whatever, you're not going to share your secrets, nor your dirty laundry, nor very penetrating answers to any question. You have to get to know and build a relationship with people before, so that they trust you in providing a deeper understanding of what's going on. Point one. Point two, empirical evidence clearly shows that the longer time people spend in the field, this is a human resource study, the higher the quality of their research in terms of subsequent citations, and also with regard to implementation of their research. A third point with regard to duration of time is to understand what is your dissertation going to be, 1 or 2 studies, or are you talking about a program of research? I would hope you think of it in terms of the latter, that you are engaging in a long-term research program so that you can become world class on that subject. Herbert Simon says it takes about 10 years to become world class on something. Well, you may quibble if it's 5 years or 7 or 10, but it's not going to be a one-time show. It's going to take a series of papers and a series of studies, and so that your dissertation is but the first of a series of studies to launch your career, so that you can penetrate into a meaningful research contribution that will have some impact. You're not going to do it with one single paper. It's going to take a series of continuous ongoing studies. And so duration is also a matter of making impact so that you come to understand the subject matter. Far too many researchers dilute themselves in their energy by flitting and fleeing from one subject to the next, and thinking of a research project as a paper, as opposed to a stream of research to build world-class competence.
Great, thank you very much. And we do have a few questions here that are coming in from participants. And the first question perhaps here for Dan Putka, his perspective on structural equation modeling and its potentials.
Yep. Yeah, this is a great question. SEM certainly has its place. I mean, with a lot of these methods, regardless of whether we're dealing with prediction methods or different variations on structural equation modeling, they help address different types of questions. Right. So with prediction models, for example, that I talked about, like random forests or support vector machines, you're not really getting into kind of paths or systems of relationships, right? The end goal is to predict some outcome. Whereas SEM, it's typically more about modeling entire systems of relationships. That being said, I think some of the more interesting work in this area is when people start blending SEM and machine learning models. And there was one example of this, I believe, in the 2016 Psych Methods special issue on big data. It was an article that focused on basically combining sort of classification and regression trees, random forests, with SEM models. And I'm blanking on the exact name of the method used, but this is actually an open research area in the methods literature, essentially blending traditional SEM models with machine learning models.
Great. I would like to pick up on one general question here, and I'd love the panelists could briefly weigh in. What's the best method to collect primary data if triangulation is not available? I think we can keep our thoughts brief on this one because it's a very broad question, but a few quick reactions.
Do I answer?
Yes, please.
I would say triangulation is simply asking and obtaining information from different sources to understand a question. At minimum, the first source of triangulation would be the literature, as was suggested, so that you come to understand what the subject is about. The second source is to talk with a person. Engagement is critical, not only with the literature, but with people who know the problem or question.
Great, thank you. I might add on here, right, is the notion of what's the best method to collect primary data depends on what the research question and what the most proper data will be for that research question. It's another consideration.
Yep.
Perhaps also to add on to the previous question that I raised, that this would be again for Andy van der Ven. A participant asks here, considering the time constraints in a PhD program, should PhD candidates still pursue an engaged scholarship approach?
And the answer is yes, of course. You're doing it already. When you talk to others, you get more informed. I'm suggesting with engaged scholarship to do it in an efficient, productive, directed way. instead of just talking with your wife or husband or friend, think carefully about stepping outside of yourself. We need to talk to people different from ourselves. Otherwise, we're just spinning the same song and dance all the time. But the time issue is one that you pay me now or you pay me later. You pay me now means that you invest a little time to talk with different people to get a better understanding of the phenomenon. Or you pay me later. You revise and revise and revise, and you probably get rejected by a number of journals because the nature of the problem or the question or the phenomenon or the model is not adequately or correctly or in a significant way advances existing knowledge. You don't advance existing knowledge unless you talk with different people. So it's a matter of time now versus later. And clearly, it's going to take much less time to talk with a few people now rather than to go through that arduous process of revising and getting rejected later.
Thank you. We have a different question here, and I think that would be good to answer for Dan. A broad question on potential negative views about machine learning, and that is being considered as data snooping, and what kind of arguments could be made to address these concerns.
Right. Did we want to do the one above that first, or do we want to do?
No, just this one first, please.
Got it. Okay, no problem. Okay, so yeah, certainly there is a great potential for abuse with methods, particularly ones that are more empirically driven. So I think the argument against this is careful design, right? So regardless of what type of research you're doing, research design is of paramount concern, right? Because it creates threats to potentially the quality of the inferences you want to make, all right, just generally speaking. Modeling is no different. So one of the areas I see people running into problems who apply machine learning methods, and this isn't only people in our fields, this is people in other fields as well, that, in the literature I've read, is just insufficient cross-validity designs. So basically, how are they avoiding capitalizing on chance, or what's kind of become known as p hacking or variations on p hacking within the management and IO fields. And there are robust designs to help prevent that from happening. I would say even more robust than what we typically do in our field, say in terms of doing simple things like adjusting p-values for multiple comparisons, or sort of looking at correlations in a larger set of data and then fitting a regression model on those that happen to be significant or that meet some minimum size. So the answer to this question, I think, comes down to careful implementation of these methods in a model fitting and cross-validation process that avoids, minimizes the potential that you're capitalizing on chance.
And perhaps a very brief answer also to the previous question on R versus Python, so that we don't get too much into the technicalities here.
Yep. I have used R for topic modeling. Latent Dirichlet allocation is implemented in R, as is something called structural topic models. If you haven't checked out structural topic models, I would recommend them. Most of the documentation is produced by social science researchers, very easy to cut through. If you go high end, you're going to be looking at Python, because the text analytic capabilities of Python tend to be a little bit greater than R at the current time.
Here we have a specific question for Andy van der Ven on his suggestions on the building of the relationship with participants, on how much time should be spent between meetings. And would you like to respond to this question briefly? Andy, are you there?
So I can't get, do you hear me
there we
now?
go. Yep, we hear you again.
Oh, because I was muted. Okay, now okay, very good. So I cannot start because the host has stopped it. Okay, the answer dealt with how much time does it take to get to know someone? Well, how frequently and how long do you need to talk with someone to get to know that person? There is an excellent book that you should perhaps read, which is by Collins, that I mentioned in my talk on interactive expertise. And his point is you cannot know or study a subject that you do not know. If you do not know the language, the culture, the context in which you're doing a study, then whatever data you are collecting is kind of nonsensical. Many of those who are only looking at large databases without doing the qualitative study that Dan and others have suggested are running afoul because they're losing sight of reality through the numbers. That is, examining and analyzing data without having this qualitative understanding is going to be kind of a misdirected kind of research. You have to ground the subject matter in order to make the case and understand of the phenomena, what's going on. Is that what you're asking about? Does that address your question?
Well, we'll have to hear back from the consortium participant, but I believe that was addressing the question that this person was raising. Now we only have a few minutes left here. We go until 2:45 Eastern time, and yes, the participant thinks it affirmed that it answered the questions. Perhaps we can to conclude on a more on a broader topic that was raised in Ryan Krause's comments, and he is not with us now, but perhaps we can get the thought of the two other panelists on this. In his talk, Ryan spoke about the weighing of being a pragmatist and being an idealist in doing research, and I think that's a potentially really important consideration for doctoral students as they are thinking about designing their dissertation. So, Andy and Dan, if you have any comments on this notion of pragmatism versus idealism, that might be a good way to conclude our session.
Dan, you want to start?
I was looking for you to start, but I could give it a shot. Well, part of the reason I wanted you to start is I'm not an academic. I'm actually a practitioner. I work for a nonprofit research organization. So most of my research is very pragmatic in nature. It's typically a blend of a client coming to me with some applied research problem or some need for evaluating something within their organization that has a nexus to management or IO psychology, and me kind of reacting to that problem and providing them, with a study that addresses the questions they have. And so it tends to be very pragmatic in nature. Less so idealistic maybe, and much more to the pragmatic needs of my clients.
Okay, thank you. My take is this. Obviously, pragmatics are genuine. We have to pay attention to institutional norms and conventions and practices. But quite frankly, I think if you only pursue the pragmatics, you'll be dead wood before or at the time of tenure. That's been my experience in observing others. What's it all about? And I think it's about scholarship, a calling, a higher calling. Ernest Boyer emphasized that, and I really encourage you to read Scholarship Reconsidered, a wonderful book in 1996 that emphasizes the importance of curiosity, of critical thinking, of added engagement, in the scholarship of teaching and of research and of outreach and service. The need for recognizing that it's about internal rewards, not extrinsic. Yes, we do need to get bread on the table. We do need salary. We do need appointment. But where the love comes, the passion comes, is with achieving some internal rewards of a feeling of satisfaction, of impact. It's a lifelong learning quest, developing faculty, developing our capabilities. The thing that gets me is I talked about that neighborhood block meeting where we developed through a series of meetings the nominal group technique. The thing that really got me, though, is by the fourth meeting, as I recall, some elderly gentleman came to me and said, this is the first time in my life where I felt I could speak my mind. Now that got me. The opportunity to engage in research as a management or organizational or social scholar and to make contributions both to theory and to practice hooked me. And that is the calling of faculty, of scholars in professional business schools.
Great, thank you very much. I think this was, at least to my ears, a quite inspirational message and response to this question. And I think this is also a very good way to conclude today's session. Thank you very much again here to Andrew Van de Ven, to Dan Putka, and to Ryan Krause, who is not here with us. Hopefully he will be safe with this tornado warning there, to giving their time for this session. And thanks very, very much to Larry Williams and his team at Kammer for making this online format possible in the first place. So, and thanks, of course, to all the participants for joining in here today. With the help of Kammer, we will make the recording of the session available, as Larry explained in the beginning, on the Kammer YouTube channel. And I will work also with the participants to make the slides available. Again, big thank you to everybody, and we will be back next week, next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, with our session on new approaches to collecting and sourcing data with Stine Grodal, Aaron Hill, and Scott Tonydundle. And Larry, do you have any concluding words to offer for us?
Oh, yeah. Hey, I just wanted to give the opportunity to thank everybody. And from my end, special thanks to Andrew Hanna, who was up front and communicating with everybody and lurking in the background sometime. Andrew, you do a great job on our Zoom work. Thank you. Yeah. Thomas, congrats on the success of organizing this. This was a great first session. And Andy Van de Ven, I did too find your comments inspiring. So we'll look forward to joining you all next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.